everyone, Clio here, and today I'm going to be talking about Quichotte by Salman Rushdie. So this is the final one of my Booker Book Talks in the 2019 edition. So it's the final book that I had to read for the shortlist of the Booker Prize 2019. Now, just a small part about the Booker Prize 2020. So as I did this year, I'm going to try and read the entire long list, and I'm going to try and get a little bit ahead from the long list this year. So you might see some Booker Book Talks for books that will eventually maybe not land on the shortlist. In this year I only talked about the shortlisted ones, but so we'll see, maybe there will be some more Booker Book Talks in the 2020 edition. But so the final one that I had to read, both of the shortlist and of the long list, was Quichotte by Salman Rushdie. This is a Don Quixote retelling, and that's also part of the reason why I kept it as last, because I had these vague intentions of reading the Don Quixote before diving into this one. But the Don Quixote is a 1,500 page book that I also have in the Spanish edition, so it's just too damn daunting, so I haven't started that one, and I did want to try and finish this one before the long list of 2020 was announced. But so Quichotte is a Don Quixote retelling, and Don Quixote is a 16th century, I think, Spanish novel in which we are following a man who has been driven mad by reading too much literature. So he starts to see himself as one of these heroes that he's constantly reading about. He sets out on this quest to try and prove his word to his love, Dulcinea. Along his journey, he is accompanied by a servant of his called Sancho Panza. But so these three characters will be reimagined in this story. So in Quichotte by Salman Rushdie, we are following our main character Ismail Smile, who is of Indian descent, and he gets driven mad by watching too much reality TV. So he falls in love with one of the reality TV hosts, and he sets out on his journey to meet her for the first time. Along his journey, he is accompanied also by a Sancho character, but this is an imaginary character. It's somebody who he has created into being. So he has made wishes to the stars, and he was granted this imaginary son. Now this book, contrary to what I think the Don Quixote is, this book is written in a whole lot of different perspectives, and it's also blending reality with fiction on the level of the book itself. So it's not just looking at this character who can no longer distinguish between reality and fiction, but we are also layering the book in such a way that it becomes difficult for you as a reader to distinguish the different layers of the book at all times. So the story arc that I've just told you about is the story within the story, to talk about it, because that story is being written by an author that we are also reading about. So the author of the deepest point of this book, let's call it like that, he is writing this story. It's very unlike any of the other stories he's written so far, because he's very much been more of a crime writer so far, and throughout the book it will become very clear that he is mirroring a lot of himself onto these characters, onto this new world that he is building. So I did very much like that sort of play on reality and fiction, on that blurry line that is becoming increasingly blurry for our protagonists, but also for us as a reader. So in certain parts of the book, I really felt like I had to resettle myself and be like, wait, on which scale are we now? This character, is this one of the characters that is present in the author layer of the novel, or is it present in the protagonist layer of the level? And then of course there's this further level of you knowing that it's written by another author even, and so you wondering how much of his life has Salman Rushdie put into this book. So I did definitely enjoy that. However, I did feel like it was such a struggle for me to get through it that I cannot credit it for doing that. I liked the fact that it went there, I liked that element to the story, but overall I just didn't get enough enjoyment out of this one to be able to appreciate it to its fullest. Part of the reason for that, I feel, is the characters. So what I was imagining going into this story was a very much more straightforward one than the one that I got, but the problem is that we are adding so many characters into this book, and so many characters have so many echoes of one another. You know, our protagonist Quichotte is very much a reflection of the author himself. Then our Quichotte in the story will have a sister, while the author in the story also has a sister, and their narratives are also mirroring each other, very much going in parallel with one another. And because you have these same sort of occurrences within these fictional characters as within the layer 2 fictional characters, it was more difficult for me to emote to it, because I felt like, yeah, they weren't as special anymore, they weren't as singular, and very much I also feel like they weren't as developed as I like to see my characters being. I very much felt like they were more there for the plot, more there for this sort of layering experiment that he was working out, than they were actually there for a character development, for a character story. So I definitely feel like his focus was more on that blurring of fiction and reality, and I still need a character connection for me to be able to go through this book, because there was nothing really driving me forward in this book except for stubborn will to continue with it. That is going to be a big part of my problem with it, because especially in the beginning, I think like the first 100 pages or so, you are getting a chapter from a different perspective every single time. So it takes a very long time before we return to our protagonist, before we return to this story of the Quichotte retelling. And so possibly I just went into it with wrong expectations. I went into it expecting like an adventure story in the sense of Quichotte, and that got shot down a little bit by the way in which the story was structured and the way in which the things that it was trying to achieve. But so maybe if you go into it knowing what I've just said, it might be easier to get through. But in any case, on my side, there really wasn't anything pushing me through. Things that I did like about this book, so I've already said that I did appreciate that level of blurring of the realities, but what I also very much enjoyed was the representation of racism, and especially in the character of Sancho Panza. Because the Sancho character in this story is an imaginary character, you know, he has been given life by Quichotte's wish. So it's very much a character who is thrust into this world, who has zero background knowledge of this world, zero frame of like how people are supposed to be acting, how people are normally acting towards one another, and so he also has zero experiences of racism. And so he's thrust into this world looking like a 16-year-old, 17-year-old boy of Indian descent, and so he will very soon get acquainted with some of the harsher realities of living in the US and a whole lot of other countries around the world. The harsher realities of being looked at differently, being suspected of things, being treated in a way purely because of his skin color. And so he will also start to behave differently. He will start to try and put himself in the background, trying not to call attention to himself, trying not to use his native tongue and things like that, and we see this develop even further. But I very much like this look at racism in America through the perspective of somebody who is just thrust in there from one day to the other, and who really goes from like a happy-go-lucky character into a character that is constantly in fear, constantly self-doubting, and becomes angry and things like that as a result. But I do feel like that part of the story was kind of just a small element thrust in there, and it kind of got lost in the overwhelming story arc of this book. So I do definitely feel like Salman Rushdie was trying to do too many things in here, was trying to put too many things into this book, and as a result he wasn't able to elaborate any of them to the extent that I found entertaining or that I found enjoyable. So yeah, that's going to be my book talk for Quichotte by Salman Rushdie. I feel like a whole lot of it went over my head, so definitely do encourage you to also look at somebody else's review for this one. But so sadly for me, this wasn't a new like great experience or a new great discovery. So, but yeah, on to the next one, on to the next Booker Prize Longlist, and hopefully on to some other great reads.